Hi, and welcome to this hands-on tutorial series. My name is Thijs, and today we're going to be creating a digital insurance agent that can interact via chat. Let's have a look at what we're going to build. We're going to build an insurance agent that can communicate via a web chat that sits on a website. We'll create two end-to-end processes and learn how to fall back to Knowledge.AI for additional questions. Furthermore, we'll add a logging feature, and we will add some LLM features to make the experience even better. So let's get started. Let's take a moment to scope our AI agent. It's important to come up with a basic persona so that we can make our AI agent more lifelike. We'll call her Anna, and Anna works as a first-level support agent on the chat channel for Insure Luna. We found that there are two processes that generate a lot of service requests for Insure Luna, so we want to get started with giving Anna the ability to help with these service requests. First, we want her to be able to process claims. And then we also want to make sure that she can handle billing requests, more specifically sending an invoice copy. Lastly, we want to make sure that she can actually answer free form questions about insurance policies. In order to tackle this, we'll have to combine Cognigy NLU, so the natural language understanding, as well as Cognigy Knowledge AI, and we'll add some LLM features on top to make the whole experience a little bit more fluent. Let's get started. So we're now logged into the Cognigy.AI trial environment, and we'll start by creating a new project. We'll call the project Tutorial Series Chat Anna, and we'll start with the English NLU language for now. We will not set up live agents, and the only thing we'll add in terms of channels is the standard web chat and the newer updated webchat v3. We'll skip the pre-made skills and click on Create to set up the agent. Great. We're now good to go and have a chat with our agent. I will start from scratch, so we will remove the say node and we'll start with a common pattern. And that pattern is to start with a once node to initialize the conversation. And under the on first time to the left is where we'll start with the introduction. We have the ability to simply add text information here, right? But what we can also do is pick rich media, for example, an image. I'll add an image, an avatar image of Anna here, and on second thought, I'll actually switch to the gallery image type because I think it looks a little bit better and it allows us to add a title. Welcome to Insure Luna. The interesting thing about Cognigy is that we will automatically try to parse this content to any channel, right? So we have this rich media output that works for the web chat, but it will also work on channels like WhatsApp. I'll add a new say node, another say node, and this time I'll pick the text with quick replies from the drop-down list. This allows us to add some more information and to present the users with a set of so-called quick replies. These are essentially buttons that the user can click, and these will then send something to the AI agent on behalf of the user, right? So we'll give it a title, and then for the postback value, we'll enter the text that should be sent on behalf of the user to the AI agent when that button is clicked, right? So it's a quick reply. Instead of typing it out, our users can simply click on a button. We'll pick the following. I'll say I need to request a copy of my invoice because that's something a user could say. I'll save this and then I'll add another one. This time we'll call it submit a claim. And for the payback value, I'll say I would like to submit a claim, and we'll hit save. We'll save the node and we'll try it out in the interaction panel at the top right. And you see that we get beautiful rich media as well as quick replies with a welcome text. All right, we're now going to have a look at setting up LLMs. It's very important to note that LLMs, Gen AI, is not required to build a successful AI agent. It can, however, dramatically speed up the time of development. And that's why we'll have a look at configuring some LLMs so that we can generate training data for the NLU. And it should also allow us to use knowledge AI later on as a fallback mechanism for open-ended questions. So let's go to our menu, and then under Build, we'll select LLMs. Cognigy supports a broad range of LLM providers, and each provider typically has multiple models. So we'll click on New LLM, and the one that you most commonly use, or most likely use, is OpenAI. Everyone's heard of them, and it's very easy to just create an account online and generate an API key. The model that I would recommend you use is 3.5 Turbo, and I suggest you use the ChatGPT version. It's a very strong all-round model that is also very cost effective. If you select a model, the next step is to configure the credentials or the so-called connection. And for OpenAI, that's essentially an API key. As you can see here, we have a bunch of keys, and all you need to do is you need to create a new API key here at the top right, and that will add it to the list of your keys. I suggest you give it a name that makes it easy to recognize what the key is used for. All right, the other thing I suggest you do is create another model, and this time it's an ADA002 model. That's for the vector embeddings, and we're going to use that for our knowledge AI later on. And this model will help us interpret documents and larger text, and it will allow us to answer questions using LLMs. You can see that I created the exact same models, but I used Azure OpenAI, which is essentially the same. It's just that it's hosted by Azure, and the reason I did that is that I find it to be slightly more performant. The availability on Azure seems to be better. What's important though is that you configure these LLMs and tell Cognigy what to do with them. Right? And for that, we can go to our settings, and then the first thing we'll have a look at is knowledge AI. And the only thing we need to do is we need to tell Cognigy that for knowledge AI, it needs to use the ADA model that we just configured, and the answer extraction should stay at 3.5 Turbo. And then if you scroll down, there's many more settings that we can enable, right? So there's many things that Cognigy can use LLMs for. Again, this is not required to build an AI agent, but it's there, and we need to configure it if we want to use it. Next up, setting up the NLU. The natural language understanding is, of course, very important. It will allow us to drive the conversation in a certain direction. In Cognigy, the NLU is part of our flow, so we head back to the Build menu, and once we get back to our flow, we'll click on the NLU tab at the top right. The NLU menu, or the NLU environment, if you will, allows us to create intents. It allows us to work with slots, and the first thing we're going to do is create an intent that helps us identify what the user request is about. So I'll create an intent for submit claim, and what I'll do is I'll add a short description, a user wanting to submit a claim for their property, so we'll list the type of insurances, car or travel insurance. And then we'll click the toggle at the bottom that says sentence generation, right? And what this will do is it will literally generate a couple of training sentences for the NLU. And voila, this looks pretty good. I'll repeat the process, so I'll create another intent, and this time I'll create an intent for the invoice copy. Request invoice copy. I'll add a description. A user requesting a copy of their invoice, and I'll generate another couple of example sentences. And after we created the intents and added some training data, it's time to build the model. So we click on Build Model. It will take a couple of seconds, and what it will do is it will generate a natural language understanding model based on the intents and training data that we just provided. You can go in and do this manually, but as you could see, using LLMs to generate the training data is just a lot faster. What Cognigy will show you are scores. We can take these intents and now connect them to the flow. So the common thing to do here is to use a lookup node, and the lookup node is configured and set to intent by default. Right? So logic lookup. And what this will allow us to do is it will allow us to drive the conversation into a certain direction based on the intent that was found. So we'll select one of the two intents that we just created in the NLU panel. Let's start with request invoice copy. So that's what the second case is for. And the third case is for submit claim. And what it means is that after we have our once node, right, it goes to the left where we introduce the bot, all other requests go to the right where it says afterwards and then land in the intent lookup tree. And we can then direct the conversation in a certain direction based on the intent that was found. If, for example, we have a question about an invoice copy, the conversation should continue to the middle of the lookup tree. The left side is for when we don't find an intent, right? So that's essentially the part where the bot did not understand, based on the training that we gave it so far, what the conversation is about. Let's try it out. We say hi, it runs into the once node, it gives its introduction, and then we say, I want a copy of my invoice for tax purposes. And you'll see that it correctly detects that this is about an invoice request, right? Now, one amazing feature we have in Cognigy is under settings we have expert mode. If you click on that, it will show you the actual score for that particular intent that it found, right? This was not part of the training data, and that's the magic of the NLU. Its sole purpose is to classify the text that the user entered and to then say what this belongs to, right? So which intent should it classify this input text as? And it did so correctly, and seeing the score helps us understand how certain it was about the classification. Let's try another one. I had an accident, I need to submit a claim, and yes, you see that it correctly identifies the second intent as well. Let's try something else. Blah, 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 blah. And it did not find an intent for that input, and that makes sense because we did not create an intent for that, right? So in that case, it will run into the default case, and this is where we'll use the magic of Knowledge.AI. So let's start by setting up Knowledge.AI. Knowledge.AI is an amazing system that allows us to upload documents, to absorb or ingest information from websites, and we can extend our AI agent with this information next to the two transactions that we just created. So let's go to the Knowledge.AI manual under build, and then the first thing that we need to do is we need to set up a so-called knowledge store. A knowledge store is essentially a database or a collection of knowledge sources. So let's give it a name. I'll call this knowledge store our insurance documents. It's even better. We already set up the LLM, remember, in the previous step, right? So we don't have to do that. It automatically recognizes that. And then if we go for the next step, we get to upload so-called knowledge sources. Cognigy supports different types of knowledge source. So we have files, and files could be a Word document, could be a PDF document, right? So we support a broad range of files that can be uploaded. And I actually prepared a file, an example PDF, about a car insurance. This is a car insurance policy. It has some specific information in it. It has some guidelines, and I will use this file to see if Knowledge.AI can answer specific questions about it. And the only thing I need to do is to click drag the file in and drop it here in the drop zone. And I'll click on next, and then Knowledge.AI will finish setting up the store, and the next step is for it to ingest the files. I will not create a new flow because I want to use Knowledge AI in our existing flow. I'll click next, and everything is now set up, and Cognigy Knowledge AI is interpreting or ingesting, I should say, the PDF. And it seems to be finished. So let's have a look. You can see that the knowledge store insurance documents has one document, so one knowledge source. And what happened is Cognigy ingested or actually parsed this document and then ingested its contents and then split it into individual chunks. And these chunks are little, well, you could almost see them as paragraphs, right? And the reason these chunks are important is because they will show up as search results when we use Knowledge AI in action. And the amazing thing about Cognigy is that we are very transparent with this whole process. So you can inspect these chunks, you can add metadata. We actually went ahead and did so automatically, right? So you have the page numbers and everything available as metadata. And this whole process is very important. It's an important philosophy that we have at Cognigy, right? This is not a black box as it is with many other systems. So we can go in and change those chunks if we want, right? We can add additional knowledge sources, and we can even mix and match different knowledge sources altogether. So let's go back to our flow. We only have the main flow, and then under the default case, right? So remember the lookup intent. The two to the right are intents. If it does not find an intent, I wanted to have a look at what Knowledge AI says about the question of the user. So we have the search extract output node that we can use for that. And we simply need to point it to a knowledge store, right? The insurance documents that we created. And then there's a couple of settings that we can enable or disable. There's the actual prompt that we have access to. So it's very important that you understand what this does, but you don't have to change anything for it to work. The extract settings are the most important setting, right? So let's enlarge this menu. And you see that the extract settings expose the actual GPT prompt that we'll use on top of the knowledge results, right, of the search results. So the way this works is the user enters a text, we do not find an intent, right? And then we want to output the answer as a text or maybe an adaptive card. And it can answer it based on the knowledge sources that we uploaded, and it will use a GPT prompt to then formulate an exact answer to the question that was asked. So let's try this out real quick and see what it does. So I'll open my interaction panel, I'll say hi, and it will go into the once node to the left. And now, instead of triggering an intent, I'll ask a very specific question about the document itself. So there seems to be a section about child seats. So I'll say, okay, let's try it out. Are child seats covered under my insurance policy? And it could trigger an intent as well, right? Because this has to do, of course, with filing a claim. And you see that indeed it's not a very high score, but it is a little bit confused. It says, hey, this could also have something to do with submitting a claim. So what I'll do is I go to my settings at the top. I'll enable the intent threshold setting, and I'll tell the NLU that it should be a bit more critical before it triggers an intent, right? So we want to, only trigger an intent if it's relatively certain and not if we get a 0.5 score, right? That will be a little bit too low. In that case, we wanted to go to knowledge AI instead. So let's try it again by resetting the session. I'll say hi. We'll enter the same text, and now you see it does not trigger the intent, so it falls into the default case all the way in the left, right? Even though it did have some overlap with claims, it's now clever enough to figure out that it's not really this intent, right? The score is not high enough. So it will fall in the default case. It will ask Knowledge AI, hey, can you answer this question? It will find the relevant chunks and then run a GPT prompt, all happening in this node, right? And this prompt will then try to answer the question very specifically based on the information that we have at hand. And It even added the specific amounts that are listed in the insurance policy document, right? So this is really cool stuff. We can also ask follow-up questions, right? There is a contextual search setting that you can enable in the search extract output node, right? I can ask another question, see if it can handle that as well. While driving, how does that work? And you see, yes, it does not find an intent, so it lands in the default case. It tries its luck with Knowledge AI, and it comes up with a pretty accurate answer. Yeah, and this is a really powerful system, right? You'll have intent, those things that you wanted to classify. Maybe you want to build a process for that, which is what we're going to do in just a bit. But knowledge AI is something that you can always fall back to, right? Because there's a gazillion questions that people could ask, even about a single insurance policy document. Great. So Anna can now answer questions about policy documents. She can recognize certain intents. So it's now time to create those actual transactions, right? So that she can do something meaningful. So we already created the request invoice intent and the submit claim intent. Let's start with the request invoice copy intent. And the first thing we'll do is add a say node where we acknowledge that the user just asked for an invoice copy. So we'll say, great, I can help you with your invoice. We'll save. And then after that, we need to ask a question because we need to get an invoice number, right? Because that's something that we need to ask. So it's not a yes no type. It's not an email address either, or a date, not a temperature. So we have an invoice number in a specific format, and there is a way to depict specific formats using so-called regexes or regular expressions. This is not Cognigy specific. This is used a lot, right, in computer science in general. So we can say, I need 7 digits, and these regexes are typically available, right? It's not something that you have to figure out yourself. It's company specific. We now need to configure the question itself. Please enter your invoice number, right? And we could have just picked number, right? Which would mean that any number would go. But in this case, we want to be specific. So I'd say hi. I'll trigger the bot. I need a copy of my invoice. It finds the right intent, as you can see, right? Please enter your invoice number. Well, that is 002. And again, we told it should be 7 digits, right? That's why it does not validate it as a correct invoice number. So let's ask the bot how many digits should it have, and it says no, I cannot help with that. I didn't understand it correctly. Please enter your invoice number. And this is typical chatbot behavior, right? It's not something that we want. We want something slightly more intelligent. So what we could do is we could say, whenever we land with a reprompt situation where we need to reprompt or re-ask the user for the input, instead of just sending back hard-coded, text, we can also ask an LLM, and this is called LLM-based reprompting. And this feature allows us to trigger an LLM whenever the user provided an answer to the question that is not valid. So all we need to do is update the prompt. You ask the user for the invoice number, and an incorrect number was given. You now need to guide the user back in a polite way and ask for the invoice number or their invoice number again. But we can also add some more information. So we could say an invoice number has 7 digits, right? And it starts with, let's say, 2024, right? That's very common with invoices. So we can save that. But before we do so, I want to make sure that, whenever this reprompt is triggered, that it does not repeat the question itself, because that sounds very static. Let's try it again. We say, hi, I need a copy of my invoice. It finds the intent. It asks the question, please enter your invoice number. And now I say, how many digits should it have? And now the LLM kicks in and says, well, it should have 7 digits, and it typically starts with number 2024. Sure, that's 2024, 1, 2, 3. right? The full 7 digits. And now you see the question passes and the green line goes to the bottom, which means that the question is successfully validated. So another one of those LLM features that we can use, we don't have to use, but we can use, is called LLM enhanced outputs. So what we can do with LLM enhanced outputs is we can take a predefined answer, right? So whenever someone asks for an invoice copy, we say, okay, I can help you with your invoice, right? That's perfectly fine. But we can use AI enhanced outputs to take that predefined output that we have here and to then shape it to the context of the conversation, right? So I'll say, okay, let's create some creativity. Let's give the LLM some creativity here with the slider. Let's hit save. And now I say, hi, I have a family emergency and I need a copy of my invoice, right? So it finds the intent and it also says, oh, okay, I understand that you have a family emergency and require a copy of your invoice. I'm here to assist you with that. So it's trying to be a little bit more empathetic, right? It takes the standard predefined output and then sends it to an LLM. It says, hey, can you shape it a little bit more to the conversation, so the previous inputs? And that does a lot, right? It's safe because it's not completely free-form LLM driven, but at the same time, it adds a more human touch to the whole conversation. It's not as static as typical chatbots are. Let's continue with our flow because we're almost there. So I'll add another question node here at the bottom, right? And maybe we'll pick type email, right? Thank you. Could you please provide your email address, right? Because we want to send the actual invoice to the user. Please provide me with your email address, like so. And then we want to make sure that the email is sent based on whatever is answered in this node, right? So we have a pre-built node for sending email notifications. We can just add it here, and then the recipient, the person receiving that email, the email address comes from the question before, and we have a token system, right? Where you can click on Control Space or on the AI button and then simply add last question result. The subject is your invoice copy. Dear customer, please find your invoice copy here, and then maybe this is where you would insert a dynamic link. Maybe you do an API request to an actual invoice system, billing system, right? And then we'll wrap up the email with best regards, insure Luna, like so, right? And now we have a fully transactional process, right? Intent driven, and we'll run through it one more time. And sometimes we have a situation where users over answer. So let's update that as well, right? Sometimes the information is provided directly when the intent is triggered, and then we don't want to ask a certain question at that point, right? Because the answer was already given in the initial sentence, like, "Hey, can you give me a copy of invoice number 2024 123?" Right? So we have a another trick up our sleeves for that. And it's one of those standard settings that we can use in our question node, or actually these are advanced settings, but they're in our question nodes by default, right? So you don't need LLMs for it. And we can simply say, hey, if you have the answer, skip this question, right? Don't ask this question again. So let's try it out end to end. So I say, hi, we trigger the flow with the once node, and then we say, I need a copy of invoice number 2024, 123. It triggers the intent, it skips the question where it asks for the invoice number and then asks for our email address, right? So we'll just enter an email address here, bob@gmail.com. The email is validated and the email is sent out using our email notification process, an end-to-end invoice copy process. Wow, we made so much progress. So let's now focus on deploying the flow so far to an actual endpoint, so to the Webchat endpoint. If you go to deploy in the menu, and select endpoints, then you see that we already have a couple of Webchat endpoints that have been created. And this is maybe a little bit confusing. We recently introduced a new Webchat version, right? So there's two. We have the standard one, and we have the new ones. And there's many more endpoints that we can simply add, right? Including WhatsApp and other channels that we could simply add and publish our bot on. So I took an endpoint from another project, and I will show you what that what the website looks like. So if you click on a web chat endpoint, you see that you need to point it to a flow. The flow is essentially our AI agent, right? The flow that we've been building so far with the introduction. But we can have multiple endpoints use the same flow. That's fine, right? If you scroll down, there's a lot of settings in every endpoint. In the webchat endpoint, we can tweak the layout. So let's switch to the other one, and you open the standard layout, right? And this is what that looks like. It looks pretty cool, right? But it's also a little bit generic, a little bit bland, perhaps, right? It's pointed to our flow, so we have Anna answer, and everything is great. But there's more that we can actually do with a webchat endpoint like this. And I want to show you what it could look like if you put some more effort into it, right? Which is what I did. That's why I uploaded this endpoint here. So the basics are the same, but under layout, we add some more information. First off, there's the name, Anna from Michelle Luna. I added an avatar URL, right? Uh, I tweaked the colors a little bit, right? So the primary and secondary colors are now purple. I didn't really tweak the advanced layout settings, right? But you could override the CSS if you wanted to, for example, if you wanted to go all out, right? The widget is open source. I also went into web chat behavior, and what you can do there is you can do stuff like, well, start the bot or have the bot send a message as soon as you open the widget, right? So you don't have to type something. I also said, hey, you can receive files. People can actually upload or attach files to their message, right? Which is interesting for the submit claim process that we'll get to in a bit, right? Where people can actually upload a picture of the damage that they have, right? So that's an interesting approach. So it's very simple to set up with the providers that you can select. I also created a home screen, right, with a nice background and a greeting. How can I help you today? And I entered some so-called conversation starters. And they're similar to the quick replies that we already have in the flow. But, and let me show you real quick, the web chat so far, right, these conversation starters, the two here at the bottom, they're essentially quick replies that are available right at the start, right? So you have the home screen and then the conversation starters. We'll scroll down a little bit further. I also enabled a teaser message, which is a really interesting approach. Let me show you what it does. I'll refresh the page and I'll do nothing. I'll just wait, scroll on the website. And then what happens is, after a couple of seconds, it pops up proactively. It says, hey, if you need help, uh, let me know, right? And this is, of course, a little bit more subtle than having a full, web chat pop open without the user asking for that, right? So I really like this approach here of the teaser message. And then there's a gazillion other options that you can go through. You can set ratings, of course, terms and conditions, privacy notices, footers, headers, buttons. There's real-time translations that we could add. But for now, I just wanted to show you that this website is very customizable, right? And that you should definitely look at the options that we have available. And if you then start it, right, you see that it's a lot more engaging, right? It matches really well with the website. It's still the same flow, so we have our two processes. Let's try out the Knowledge AI one more time. Is my child seat insured, right? And it comes with an answer, right, based on Knowledge AI. So it's working really well. Let's also try one of the transactions, right? So maybe the invoice copy that we prepared, right? I did a copy of my invoice, and then you see it starts the flow that we created, right? So please enter your invoice number. Sure, that is. Or let's actually try out the reprompt, right? Is that the one with 2024? The LLM kicks in. Thank you for providing the information. It needs to start with 2024. Um, Perfect. Enter the number, accepted, entering an email address, and then the flow is completed and the invoice will be sent via email. So a really nice end-to-end process in a very nice user interface. And the last thing I did, by the way, is this background here. It's a static background. It's an image, right? So what you can do if you want to put this widget at the bottom right and have it be more of a classical chatbot experience, you can. It's not under Webchat layout. It's actually under demo Webchat settings, right? So you can enter a background image, right, to simulate an actual website, and then the center Webchat can be set to bottom right, right? And then what it does is instead of the center screen, it will put it at the bottom right with the button at the bottom right, right? And that way you have a really nice experience. All right, we're almost there. So let's go back to the flow and actually look at the submit claim process, right? So we created the intent, it's able to recognize it, but we need to build out the process itself. So we add a question node, so what we start with, and the first thing we want to ask for is a description of what happened, right? So it's not a yes no question, it's not a temperature or an email address either. It's actually an open ended text answer that we want in this case, right? So we set the question type to text and say, I'm sorry to hear that. We show some empathy, right? Could you please describe what happened? Question mark. Great. So let's add another node, right? We want the user to actually upload an image of the damage, right? Because it's very common in an insurance process in submitting a claim, and we can just add another question node, right? And then the type of question is not going to be text or email, it's going to be data because we're going to be receiving data from the end user, right? So please upload an image of the damage is what we want the bot or the AI agent to say at that point. And then immediately after that, right, we'll acknowledge that, right, the upload. So we'll say, okay, I'm processing the image. Let me have a look. And then I want to add a so-called sleep node that pauses the AI agent for a couple of seconds. So 2000 milliseconds, 2 seconds. The reason I'm doing that is that it adds to the user experience because uploading an image and having the bot say something can go really fast, right? And that's not necessarily what we want. We want to simulate that the AI agent has a look at it, that it processes whatever we just submitted, right? And we just want to make sure that it's a pleasant experience. So we'll we'll thank the user as well, of course. We can actually copy a note, right? So I can right click on a note and then paste it. And then we'll have another say note where we say, okay, thank you. Your claim was successfully submitted, right? We'll we'll get back to you or something like that, right? So, and then one more thing that we want to do at the bottom where we say, let me know if there's anything else I can help you with, right? Because technically, after this is set, we'll wait for the next input all the way at the top of the flow, right? Because maybe the user wants to trigger another intent, right? So that's why there's no question at the bottom. The process has finished and we'll go to the top automatically and wait for the next input. So we have the process built out, which is really nice. Two questions, the description, the image, right? One thing I will do is you see all of these questions, says, right? I will actually add a label to these questions to make it a bit easier to work with, right? This has no impact on the user experience. If we say ask for description, the developer experience, so us developing the bots, the AI agents, right, know what's going on. So it's just for us. Upload image, that's what we're doing here. And then there's another say node where something like confirm, processing, and again, this is not for the end user, right? The AI agent will not change its outputs based on this. This is just so that we understand what's going on a little bit better if we open the flow. Let's try it out real quick. I'll open the interaction panel, but we cannot do the image uploading in the interaction panel, right? Because it uses the webchat itself. So what we'll do next is go to the webchat endpoint, right, and configure image uploads. So we'll, and I'll just briefly show you how it works, right? If we go to the deploy endpoints menu, right, and we select the webchat itself, and go under Webchat behavior, we see the section that says attachment upload, right? And there's a couple of providers that you can pick from: Azure, Google, or AWS. And these are all containers, right? So they're like simple S3 buckets or Azure storage blobs. And what I did is I just created credentials for an Azure storage blob and pointed the WebKit endpoint to those credentials. So let's try it out. I need to file a claim. The intent is triggered. I'm sorry to hear that. Could you please describe what happened? Well, there was a lot of rain yesterday, right? So the roof started leaking. So now it says, can you upload an image of that, right? And of course we can. So what I did is I prepared an image here in my project folder, if it pops up, and I'll click and drag that image onto the web chat itself, and you see it attached the image. And now I can write a message to the bot or to the AI agent that says, here you go. I submit it, and it says, okay, I'm processing your image. Thank you. Your claim was successfully submitted, right? Let me know if there's anything else I can help you with. And if I now go to my Azure storage and refresh, you see that the third file was added to that bucket that I created here, right? So it actually works end to end, and of course, a really cool experience to have people upload images to their AI agents. So there's one more thing that we really want to do to drive it home, and that is to add an authentication flow. So maybe whenever someone submits a claim, before we have them submit their claim, we want to know who they are, right? That will be a point for us to add an authentication flow. And fortunately, that's something that you can do very easily in Cognigy. So we'll actually create a separate flow for this one, right? We could put everything in the main flow, but sometimes it's easier to create multiple flows. And if you do so, you should use a naming convention. I recommend doing that. You can add emojis as well to make it easier to distinguish one flow from another. In Cognigy, flows are not hierarchical, but they can be used as such, right? So one flow can point to another flow. Let's add another one, flow 2, and this will be the authentication flow. So I'll add a lock icon, right? You can press Windows and the period key to add icons, and I'll call it authentication flow. And yeah, so adding icons is not required, right? It's just something I like to do. So let's create this flow, and we'll start with an empty flow. And this is where we'll do the authentication itself, and we'll call this flow or execute this flow as it's called from the main flow, right? So let's start building out the authentication flow. The first thing I will do is present the user with a login form, and this is very simple to set up in Cognigy because we have the rich media formats that we support. And one of the rich media formats is the adaptive card that can collect data. So we select the data from the dropdown for the question type, right? And then instead of text, we'll point it to adaptive card at the bottom. And these adaptive cards are really, really cool. They are an open source format from Microsoft, right? And it's a format that allows you to build structured content. You can do so in this visual editor. It works on other Microsoft products as well, and we adopted it in our web chat, right? So it means that all the web chats by default can render any adaptive card, right? As long as the adaptive card has a valid format. So I'm browsing through the examples here, and I can simply copy the JSON code for it, paste it in here in Cognigy, and voila, we have a beautiful widget, right? And this looks really nice, of course. And we can also use adaptive cards for forms, right? If you go back to the designer, right, you can actually input fields, and these input fields, remember the question type, set the data, the input values will arrive as data. So I prepared a widget with a username and password and a login button, and the information provided there will actually arrive in our flow. So what we do with this information is we will add some logic, in this case a code node in Cognigy, so that we can actually do a check, right? We actually want to do something meaningful with that information. So a code node in Cognigy is very flexible, right? It literally allows you to code JavaScript and TypeScript. It has IntelliSense. It is Visual Studio Code that we use here. So let's define a variable in the context called username, right? And we give it a value, and then we define a password with a value, and then we say, hey, take whatever we got back from the identifier card in the form, right? So take that information and now check if that information provided it actually matches with the username and password that we have here on record, right? And of course, this is now hard coded, but these usernames and passwords could, of course, come from your login system, right? And this is how you would do it in real life, maybe use an OAuth flow or something else. But this is just proving and showing you how you go about, using input and then executing some logic based on that. And again, I'll update the label real quick. I'll call it authenticate, right, instead of code node. And then we need to add some logic. We'll add a sleep node just to improve the experience a little bit on the chat channel. And then we need some logic using an if statement. So you can go to if, or you can go to logic and then select if. And then we configure the if statement with if context dot authenticated is yes if the user is authenticated, right? Because the authentication code node said so. Then we want to tell the user you've been successfully authenticated. Authenticated. And if that's not the case, then we want to let the user know and say like, whoops, something went wrong, right? It looks like something went wrong. Please try again. And then, of course, when that happens, we need to go back to the start of the flow to have the user try again, right? So we want to show the login form again. So we can use the so-called go-to node for that. That will literally do what it says. It allows us to go to a specific flow. You can also go to another flow if you like, and then to a specific point in that flow, start point. Let's try it out. We say hi. The form is rendered. I'll enter Joe22. It's the username that we hard coded, and then the password needs to match. I'll say @secret exclamation mark, and then the web chat. This will be masked out, just like with a real login screen. So in the web chat itself, so hit login, and yes, we'll see. You see, we go to the left. It's been a successful authentication. If we look under the context itself, you see that authenticated is now set to true, so it goes to left. The username and password matches. Let's try out the scenario where it does not work by providing wrong information, some gibberish, right? It says, hey, this is not correct, so it goes to the right, and then it starts back at the top, right? It says, hey, please try to log in again. And that's how we create a login flow. All right, so let's now tie everything together. So we have a default search here under the default case, right? If no intent was found, we have a process for sending invoice copies, and we have the ability for users to submit claims, right? And then one thing that we just added, right, was the authentication flow. We need to add the authentication process before the claim submission starts, right? And you saw that I just did that, so I'll quickly show you how that works. We want to trigger the authentication flow from within the main flow, and we have a special node for that. That's called execute flow, right? And what it does is it literally goes to another flow, it runs through that flow, and it will automatically return to the main flow, right? And that's the difference between the go-to flow and the execute flow. The go-to flow will stay there. So I'll update the label, and I'll say execute auth flow. So it will go in there, run it once, and automatically return to this main flow here. And of course, it starts this as soon as we hit this submit claim intent. Runs through the authentication, and then runs through the rest. So let's see how all this comes together by looking at the front-end experience. but I want to show you something real quick that makes that a little bit easier, right? So you see that we have the ability to chat, you have the ability to call, and we'll get to that in the later chapter in the series. But we also have the live follow, and you see I entered some digits there. What we can do is we can take a live channel like the web chat itself, right? And then we can say, let's add a question mark with user ID, and then and then a specific user ID. This can be random, just something you can make up, right? It just needs to be unique, and you need to know what it is so you can copy it out. You'll hit enter. I'll open this web chat. This web chat now has this user ID override, right? It's just something that we can use for debugging. And then we can make the browser tab a little bit smaller, right? So we can see it. And then the idea is that we want to connect it to this live session to the editor that we're working with here. So instead of chat, we point it at live follow. We enter the user ID that we just entered in the browser tab here, right? That's important. It needs to match. And then I can click record or follow. And then one thing I'll do is I'll actually put this tab right next to the developer environment so we can actually see it side by side. So you can press the Windows and then right key for that, and then you can select the editor and you can move the aspect ratio a little bit, like so. And what I'll do now is hit select Let's Chat, and you see that now everything is synced up very nicely, right? So it's perfect for debugging. So I'll start and say I need to file a claim, because we want to run through that process. You see it recognizes the intent. It goes into the auth flow because that's the first thing we told it to do whenever this intent was found. So I'll add a username, and this username needs to match, of course, with what we configured in our evaluation, in our authentication flow. So I'll add the password now, and then I'll hit login. And you see that the information arrives. It now goes back to the main flow. So it went from the auth flow back to the main flow, right? Found the intent, went through the authentication flow here, and then this flow update, right? We can see what's going on. We can see that it's now asking for a description. Yeah, the roof was leaking because of the rain. And so I'll enter this, and then the next thing is for it to ask for an image, right? Because that's how we designed it. So I'll add the image, the photo to the web chat, right? It now attaches it to the message. I'll say, here you go. And then I'll send it, and then the image arrives. It says, okay, I'm processing it. Perfect. The claim was successfully submitted. Let me know if there's anything else that I can help you with, which is a really nice flow. What we could do finally is we could submit a rating. So you have this menu at the top right. Let me open the chat again. 3 dots. You click on 3 dots, and then you get to some settings, including a rating. And I can give a thumbs up and say this was a great experience, right? And of course, we can do it like this, but we can also ask for a rating proactively by adding it to the flow, right? So we have a special mode for that. It says, hey, request a rating, and that's fine as well, right? So you can submit it directly in a web chat, or you can design your flow as such and have it proactively ask for a rating in the flow itself, right? Depends on what you prefer. Both is possible. Shows up in our analytics, and it's an overall really nice system. And that concludes this part of the tutorial series. Thank you so much for joining. If you want to learn more, you can, of course, continue watching. You can also go to academy.cognigy.com to watch further training. We have a foundation training, we have a developer training, and there's so much more to explore. Thanks again for joining, and have a great day.